In 1996, the National Safety Council established June as National Safety Month in the United States. My name is John Savoya. I'm an executive level health and safety professional. I've been in construction for over 20 years and health and safety for over 11 of them. I thought it would be fun to conduct a few interviews of other safety professionals and post them throughout the course of this month. So stay tuned. Hey everybody, John Savoya back with another interview for the National Safety Month 2024 interview series, and today I'm with Scott. Scott, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi John, good to see you again. My name's Scott Howling, and I currently work primarily as an auditor through IHSA for the COR program here in Ontario, but I own my own consulting firm called Daedalus Safety Group. We do also consult, and we are starting to provide bespoke training for a few of our clients closer to us down here in the Niagara region. So yeah, in a nutshell, consulting, auditing, and training for safety.
Awesome. And Scott, you and I have worked together in the past, and just to kind of pump your tires a little bit, Scott is probably the best auditor that I've had the pleasure of working with. So I'm really happy that you agreed to do this with me today. But take us back. How'd you get involved in safety? Tell us your story.
Okay, well, I have a background in military and law enforcement and what I would call high-risk security. And about 13 years ago, I was finishing up an overseas contract doing private security work in Afghanistan. And I was definitely ready to retire from that industry. I was one of the few guys that had been around as long as I am that made it back with all their fingers and toes and most of their sanity. So I decided, I looked around and thought, well, what would be the best use of my skills? And it just so happened I had heard of an opportunity in Alberta to support the big firms out in oil and gas, and having a bit of a rescue emergency response background and experience. I was an EMT at the time, and I had on-rope experience. So for high angle, I got picked up by a company pretty quickly in Alberta around May of 2012. They shipped me off to Fort Mac. Spent about a year and a half up there. Really, I was badged for about 30 different client sites. I worked at all the big places, all the Suncor sites, Firebag, Mackay River, Suncor Maine, Enbridge, Syncrude, ConocoPhillips, anywhere you could think of. I was stuck out there supervising, providing rescue support, providing high angle rescue, monitoring our guys and girls in the field. I would drive as much as, sometimes 1,200 kilometers a week, trying to hit 20, 30 sites to make sure that we kept all the plates spinning for our clients. And the security world, I think, prepared me for the OHS industry. We did a lot of the same stuff for different reasons. Obviously, we had risk assessments. I tell people what I did was I came from an industry where we were trying to keep people from hurting other people to an industry where we try to keep people from hurting themselves and their friends. And, there is a lot of overlap. We had environmental factors to consider. We had job processes to consider. We had the consideration of other people's behaviors and attitudes towards our clients. I mean, albeit with malintent in that industry, but still there was a lot of transferable skills. And I found that OHS really provided me with a nice landing pad. I was able to opportunize what I had learned in my previous lives. And I felt like I was still young enough to learn, teaching old dog new tricks. I went to night school, took night courses, got my NCSO back in February of 2012, I believe. And then by 2016, I had completed a 2-year certificate through the University of New Brunswick for OHS, and that allowed me to be eligible for my CRSP. So I completed my last course for my OHS certificate in January of 2016. I submitted my application, and I actually I took the only day off that I had in March of 2016, and it was on my birthday. And so I went on my birthday. I drove 2 hours to the testing center and spent 2.5 hours in the exam, and then found out in June I'd passed and didn't think I'd passed. And then so I got my CRSP. So, just discovering that I had, I guess you would call it a penchant for learning and onboarding this information. I feel it's helped me become of what I'd like to think is as a very authentic safety person. I didn't get hurt. I'm not one of these guys that got, and you know what? I'm not blasting those guys by no means. But I know a lot of safety guys that got hurt on their tools, and they became an ambassador for safety because of that. And luckily I didn't have to find safety through that way. I felt like it was something that maybe I was skilled at, and I think I'm moderately passionate about it. I mean, you've worked with me, John, and I try to make sure that everyone that I deal with gets the best version of me, because I believe they deserve that when it comes to safety. And I really challenge myself every day with the two questions: am I good at what I do, or do I believe I'm good at what I do? And am I passionate at what I do? Because if I can't say yes to both of those, then I really need to look at stepping away and finding something that I can really offer the most benefit to the people that I interact with, because no one wants to be in the trenches next to someone who either doesn't care or isn't competent. If I love brain surgery, but I'm not good at it, I probably shouldn't be picking up any surgical tools, right? Even, no matter how much I want to be, I need to be competent. And likewise, no one wants to be next to someone that just doesn't care about their job, no matter how much knowledge they have or how much value they've brought in the past. You're only as good as your last day at work, and definitely when it comes to safety, you're only as safe as your last day at work, because that'll tell you, how you're showing up the next day. So I mean, I hope that sort of fills in my backstory. I became an auditor as part of the NCSO program, back in 2012, and I hated auditing so much. And I thought, this is just dry as dirt. And I thought, I don't know why people would be an auditor. It would seem to be the most mundane, boring thing. And it was the last course that I took for my NCSO. And I kept putting it off and kept putting it off. I thought, I'm not going to get my certification if I don't do my auditor's course. So I did it, and I survived it. But then I didn't do my maintenance audits that year. So my certification lapsed. So I went back the next year, took the course again, didn't do my certification audits that year. And then I took it a third time, and I thought, I've got to stick with this. And by that time, I had met some auditors out west, because I was still in Alberta at this time. And I had met some auditors that really helped redefine what an audit experience could be like. They were really chilled out. They were knowledgeable. They were funny. And they really turned what I felt was always just a mind-numbing, painful experience into something that really gave me an opportunity to take a close look at our programs and find ways to improve authentically, and not just to get a certificate. And I thought, wow, I was never introduced to the concept of auditing in that way. And so it became less oppressive to me to do an audit. And fast forward 3 or 4 more years, and I was like, okay, I started looking forward to audit time. I was like, oh, this is good. In my experience, some of the leadership teams I worked with, it was difficult to get traction on some initiatives and programs. And so my auditor would come in and he'd say, hey, you got anything you want me to put focus to? And I'm like, yes, right over here. Look at this. Take a look at this. And I'd step away, and he'd come back and he'd say, oh, so you're talking about this? And I'd be like, yeah. And then it would show up in the audit report, and the checkbooks could not come out fast enough because it was, once a third party comes in and you're not dirty laundry, but your business is sort of open, the book is open, then I think there's more of an incentive to get it shored up, because in house there's that saying, you can't be a prophet in your own hometown, right?
Right, right,
It's difficult. It's difficult after you've been there for a while for people to listen beyond, okay, that's the safety guy. Of course, he's going to say that. He's going to push for money. He's going to push for change. He's going to push for us to sign off on something. And I started seeing the audits as an opportunity to really drive some change. And I thought, this is great. Then we couldn't have them soon enough. I was like, let's bring the auditor back in. And
right.
then the opportunity came. I was sort of, I had hit a glass ceiling, and I'd hit like an emotional ceiling with where I wanted to be as far as corporate leadership. And one of the auditors that I had, that I would bring back from time to time, who had actually stayed with me as I changed companies, and we developed a really good relationship. And can I plug him?
Yeah,
Oh
absolutely.
yeah, his name's Cam Mitchell. Okay, of Audit. Well, no, excuse me. I think he's now just with CASA Consulting. Previously, he was with a company called Audit, but he's out of Calgary, and I used him as my primary auditor for several years. And he kind of was tempting me with the idea of becoming an auditor full time and coming out here to Ontario, because the COR program had only just gotten on its feet. They didn't have a lot of COR experienced auditors, and so they were looking out west a little bit, and so he encouraged me to come and get involved, and I did. And I just fell in love with the auditing, because I was able, so for 9.5 years before I became an auditor full time, I was in operations, and we were having auditors come in every year. So the last two companies that I worked with, we had COR in Alberta, BC, and Saskatchewan. So we had three separate CORs. And out west, most of the companies, or at least the ones that I was aware of, would just hire an auditor to come in every year, because you can do that. That's an option out there. So we would have the same auditors come in every year. So you were preparing for a lot of external audits. And I literally lived from COR to COR to COR each year, because we had three that we had to contend with. And so I learned a lot from that, from the auditee side of things. And so one of the things, and one of the reasons why I was so motivated and driven to start my own company, to focus primarily and initially on auditing, was because I wanted to try to bring the experience that I wanted to have out in Alberta to Ontario. And I know a lot of people that, even before their first COR audit, were at the point of audit fatigue, just because of all of the other processes they go through to be assessed and evaluated and inspected. And so with something as paramount as COR, because you know the message that goes out, this is a really important thing. We need this, whether it's for work or for just reputation or for that next milestone in our safety journey, is a big deal. And that comes with anxiety, and it comes with an inordinate amount of stress and effort on everyone. And what I wanted to do is, I wanted to have a service whereby I could come in and I could be the auditor I would want. I could say, look, I've been through your shoes. I know the stress of getting people, educated and ready for the interview process. I know the struggles and the challenges of the late nights and the long weekends, especially a few months leading up to the audit, where you're really reading through your manual and all the policy statements and the procedures, and you're revamping everything, and you're making sure that the investigations are being done correctly, and the toolbox talks are being recorded. And oh my God, there's so many moving parts. And so what I wanted to do as an auditor is, I wanted to be able to meet a client and say, look, I get it. I get it. And I know the struggles, and I know that you're not going to be perfect, and don't expect to be. In the military, there's a saying that inspection ready units are never combat ready, and combat ready units are never inspection ready. It's just because when you're sitting idle and everything's polished and it's pretty and there's bows on it, the machine isn't running. things
Right.
aren't wearing and breaking down. There's no noise, there's no activity, there's no waste or usage of time or materials. And the inverse of that is true as well. You know, if the machines are running and people are moving around, well, you're not perfect or pristine, but the I think the merit isn't in where you are, it's how you do it, right? And as long as that line in the middle is going up, you know, an audit's a snapshot. It's to go in and take a picture and see where are you at that day. I mean, if we woke up every day and took a picture of ourselves, there's going to be some days we look better than others, right? As long as we don't start looking too, I mean, we're always going to get old, but we can still look fit and healthy, you know, then I think
Working
it
on that
shows.
still.
Yeah,
So.
yeah, yeah. You and I both. But I just wanted to, as an auditor, come in with a different perspective and try to provide people with a different audit experience so that when I left, they would think, wow, you know what? That was pretty informative. And I have even had a couple clients use the word enjoyable, which I never thought I would hear people use in the same sentence as the word audit. So
Well, it was. I mean, so we worked with you for the COR 2020 audit. Now, since then, we've moved over to ISO 45001, which is another OHSMS that's
yeah,
in Ontario. It's part of SOCI, right? So supporting
yeah,
Ontario self-employers. And we did that because of the international nature of our business now. Um, so it just aligns with 180 other countries. But I will say that working with you was fantastic because
right,
talking to you, and this is to your point about what you said about giving somebody the audit that you wanted to have.
yeah,
I found in different audits that you get an auditor who's he's got his book in front of his face going, no, that word's missing, no, that word's missing, and it's you're sitting there thinking this has nothing to do with what I'm doing here. um,
yeah,
and I really liked your approach, and I again, I thought our audit went phenomenally, not because of the work that we did, or not only because of the work that we did, but because you also gave us an opportunity by pinpointing things that we didn't even look at as a construction company, right?
right,
Like, the exit signs that in the hallway that were illuminated, but not to the standard of the NFPA or whatever it was.
right,
You did one hell of a great job, and I think that the most important thing that I said to the team after working with you is that we learned from you. And I think that, you know, anytime, even internally, when we're auditing something, the ability to teach through the audit and
yeah,
the receptiveness to learn is super important.
yeah,
Um, which honestly, you did a phenomenal job. And look, I'm not pumping your tires here. There's a ton of people out there
yeah.
that will, speak to your
Oh,
professionalism. Aaron Hamill from Aquacon being one who I really respect in this industry,
me
and
too.
and I know the relationship that you have with him as well.
Hmm.
But when you started auditing, actually, you know what? Let me say it this way, because this is a good question to ask.
Okay.
When you made the move from Alberta to
Hmm.
Ontario, right,
Hmm.
and you were engaged in the industry both as an auditor and as a consultant, what are some of the major differences that you saw in the way that, I guess, health and safety in and of itself, as well as systems, differ? What was the biggest difference that you saw?
Between the provinces?
Yeah, and between the way that, I guess, employers engage in construction and are receptive to health and safety.
Well, I think anyone who spent time out in Alberta would agree that the industry out there, the attitude and the approach is so evolved. And I mean, and it has to be just because of the nature of the work that goes on out there. If you go out there, I mean, I've been on job sites where if you were to spill your coffee cup, you have to report it as an unintentional release or a spill. Yes, yes, I know. It
Whoa.
gets that crazy. And in another instance, you were not allowed to, because someone had fallen off of a chair while changing a light bulb overhead. You are now not allowed to go over, I think, 24 inches without getting tie off. Fall protection comes into play, and those are the extreme examples. But in a lot of the everyday life in Alberta, they work at such a, and BC, especially in the oil and gas, northern Saskatchewan, they operate at such a regular level that is what you would call the upper echelon level of safety here. That's one of the biggest differences. So coming from an environment where a lot of the things that people are just now onboarding and taking into consideration has already been something that they do on a daily basis, that it doesn't register with people. They know they have to get up, and before they even go to the job site, they have to do a pre-trip of their vehicle. They have to, as soon as they get to a job site, or like if you're a company and you have a shop and you send your guys there to get materials before you go to the job site, well, the job starts when you get to the shop, not when you get to the job site. So you're doing a JHA or JSA there at the shop. I mean, they really hammer it into you that before you make too many moves, that you plan your day and you make sure that everything that you're going to be doing and everything that you're going to rely on to do the work and do it safely has been examined and considered and documented and communicated. And that happens as soon as you get in a position where if you were to get hurt, the company could be liable for it. Whereas in Ontario, it's not as bad even as what I came across as an auditor just 5 years ago. I've just hit my 5-year mark, and here in the province. And I think what a lot of companies are doing now is they're saying, okay, well, they focus, and I believe it probably happened the same way in Alberta. I don't think that Ontario is taking too different of a path, but I think they're doing it at a rate where it's already been established, the benefit that it brings. And I think Ontario still wants to kind of go through its own paces to arrive at the same finish line, or to get to the same mile markers as out west. But companies, I come across a lot of companies all the time, and they're like, well, we don't really have our guys worry about planning their work until they're on the job site. I'm like, well, what happens if they get in their vehicle and they get into a wreck going to the shop, or they get hurt at the shop while they're loading materials? That they're actually at work. Do you have any type of discussion on how to plan your work safely? What are you doing to make sure that there's no new risks that have emerged from the last time the guys were at the shop? And it doesn't dawn on them. And I think their cognizance or their awareness of what health and safety encompasses is there's like a fog that's starting to lift. And one of the things that I try to do through my audits is I tried to shine the light on all the areas. There's a lot of overlooking of administrative work sites. We've got guys that are out there, they're swinging tools and they're running heavy equipment. The girls and the guys in the office, they just walk around and drink coffee all day. Well, there are a lot of WSIB statistics that show that some of the longest cases come from administrative-based injuries because, one, a lot of them are repetitive or soft tissue because the hazards are never identified, or the risks. And so people endure sometimes years of discomfort to the point to where it results in the need to have surgery or rehabilitation. It lasts for months and months and months. And only when something like that happens does the senior leadership team step back and go, okay, well, you know what? We need to take a look at offices as well. We can't have this, be the soft spot in or the chink in our armor. But I guess to answer your question, the biggest things I see is just the forward looking isn't quite as there. Ontario hasn't collectively. Now, obviously, you have leaders in every industry who can kind of see far enough, and a lot of those are companies that already have operations out west, so they know what's the norm, they know what's established, and they can kind of see what eventually is going to be coming down the pipe for Ontario, because it's taking the same course. It's just a lagging course. But you do have companies that are showing a little bit further forward thinking and forward vision. But I still think that a lot of the companies and a lot of the GCs who are reliant on the smaller subs, who are the mom and pops and the ones that either they don't have the budget or just historically or traditionally safety has not been at the forefront. Only what they need to do when the safety guys come, like when when they know MOL is going to make a visit, they get their hard
Yeah.
hats on, they put their harnesses on, they drag them out of the trucks. And I look for a couple of years, I did residential roofing, and I know I know the realities. Maybe not so much nowadays, but I know what happens on those sites, and I think that a lot of the things that we've seen, some of the recent legislation about the changes to PPE for women and washrooms on the job sites, and some of the other changes that we've seen, I think it's ushering in some evolutionary improvements that the province needs, and we'll get there. We'll get there, and I think that programs like ISO 45001 and COR 2020 are going to really be fundamental drivers in helping clients understand where the milestones are and help them get to those goals. So
Right. And I kind of have this perception because I've done a little bit of work in Alberta, not to the degree that you have or Mike Brown has. But when I'm very familiar with the code and the act in Alberta, and it's weird because you have Ontario, who has everything written down. Ontario's got in OREG 21391, there's over 3,000 laws in there, right, and parts to that. And it's so descriptive, it'll go right down to the cartridge of the Hilti gun, right, versus Alberta, where it's not so descriptive. And I've always kind of thought to myself, well, if Ontario's got so much more in there and Alberta's got less, and they're so much better, right? And better is subjective. I'm not saying better in terms
right,
because population is very different and industry is very different. But in
yeah,
terms of, I use better as the organizational buy-in to safety.
right,
It kind of messes with me a little bit because I'm thinking to myself, this is the economic hub of the country,
right.
and organizations are just now starting to jump on. And I do think that major players like Metrolinx, which was Crosslinks, way back when,
Yeah,
they had a lot to do with this, right? Because they
yeah.
came in and they took this international standard that originally came from England, which was miles above, and CORE as well coming into Ontario, and now with ISO becoming more prominent.
Yeah.
It just kind of blew my mind a little bit. But that's my little rant on the Ontario Alberta situation. I also do want to say, though, what I love in Alberta is that the Alberta government, through creative sentencing, has the authority, or gives the court the authority to say, hey, you know what, you've had a serious incident, we're going to take away your CORE and you're going to have to earn it back.
So, yeah, so let me tell you a story. I'm not going to name names, but so I was working with a company and we had CORE, and we had an individual who fell from a piece of equipment. And the piece of equipment was a mobile piece of equipment that at some point had anchor points. If you were to go above a certain level on it, you're supposed to put a harness on, and because in order to perform maintenance and to grease certain points of this articulating machine with a telescoping boom, you needed to be able to go up actual engineered ladder with rungs, and as you went above a certain level that was marked, if your feet were above this level, you had to tie off. So we got a call. It was in the motor pool, and I got a call that we had an injury and went down. And one of the guys that was tasked with performing the preventative maintenance on this before it went out to the location, he had fallen off, and he was in a lot of pain, and turns out he broke his femur, which is a pretty hard bone to break.
Not fun.
And it was in February, and there was ice on the ground, there was snow on the ground, and he's lying there exposed, and his harness was out of his bag. He says he wasn't above the demarcation line, we'll call it, but there were footprints on the rungs because there was snow. Okay, so
Sorry.
we had Alberta OHS come out, and we had PIR, was it Partnership and Injury Reduction? That got involved and said, all right, we need to see in 90 days a set of corrective actions which address a ton of fundamental aspects to this incident. And one of them was the perception that possibly he might have not been following the requirements for tying off. And if we didn't create a series of corrective and preventative actions that they felt was up to snuff, then they had the option to revoke our COR. Now, if one of our hundreds of jobs was on COR, all of them were on COR, literally. I mean, and so we had that oh crap moment, and as you do, and we created as many what we felt were meaningful. We just did the shotgun approach. We're going to do everything we can that we can afford to do. And they came back and they said, yeah, this is good, but they continued to check up on us. And I think that would be of benefit here in Ontario, because you don't want it to be a set it and forget it type of program, right? And I don't know. I've not asked this question of IHSA, and I obviously am no one that can speak on their behalf. But I would presume to think, since they are the sole administrators of the program, that at their discretion, they must have some type of powers where if they feel that someone is acting in such gross negligence of the requirements under which COR was granted, that they could probably do an investigation, and there must be some level of recourse. Now, luckily, we've not had anything like that I'm aware of happen. But we do, even as auditors, we'll hear stories from our clients. Oh, I can't believe so and so, as a certificate because they did this and they did that. And again, it's difficult because an audit of any type is a snapshot. You show up to prom, you look great. Sunday morning, you don't look as good. So, right. I mean, really, what's the true reflection of the company's performance? So I do think that there would be some benefit to having that mechanism, not just having it in place, but having it officially declared and obvious as one of those checks and balances that, look, if you get COR and you can't continue to show that you're abiding or adhering to the fundamental tenets of the tone or the spirit of the program, then we have the ability to go in and really reevaluate or assess your eligibility to keep it, right? So, but right. We'll see.
So I think now I'm not sure if the ministry can do that with SOCI, because that's granted by the Ministry of Labor,
right?
IHSA, I can't see why they wouldn't be able to revoke, but again, because the IHSA is not it's not a government body, right? It's a not-for-profit organization.
Right.
It's an HSA funded by WSIB and whatever. Right. I can't see why they wouldn't be able to do that with aggravating factors in place. So if let's just say you had a fatality and that fatality went to court and there was a conviction registered against an employer. And again, I won't get started on the court system because basically it's a bunch of throw poop at the walls and see what sticks there, right? But I can't see why they wouldn't be able to say, okay, well, you've received this conviction and you have a history of this many orders, which you can get with public record through a Freedom of Information request. I can't see why they wouldn't be able to revoke it, but I mean, I think that it's above my head.
Well, isn't that second part of SOCI is based on not having any type of indictments right. or charges or investigations? Correct. So
I think SOCI can be, again, I'm not 100%, but I think because SOCI, that accreditation is handed out by the government, by the Ministry of Labor themselves, I think they can revoke SOCI, but that wouldn't in turn revoke the ISO or the COR no. or the excellence program that you used to get SOCI. But I'm sorry for laughing about the footprints comment you made in your story, but as an inspector, it just made me laugh because I remember going to job sites and seeing 3-meter deep trenches with a shovel in the bottom of it and some footprints in the mud, and asking everybody, hey, what's going on down there? Oh, well, we're not going in there. I said, oh, okay, so you used like a footprint mold and threw a shovel down there? Like, what's happening? But yeah, it's never funny when anybody gets hurt at work. That's why we do what we do. But I think every safety professional on the planet would have some story that makes them laugh a little bit. But
John, really quickly, I was just going to say, to circle back on your previous comment about, yes, Ontario's laws are more prescriptive on the surface, on the face than Alberta's. But what I believe is the fundamental difference is the application of the enforcement. And I don't mean by the governmental bodies. I mean by the self-enforcement. The companies that are in Alberta, they're part of a billion-dollar industry, and there is such a drive to make sure that product comes out of the ground, that they don't really want to engage or support any behavior that would create anything less than successful results. And safety is, indelibly tied into that. So I think that there's a greater motivation at the corporate level where there's a lot of self-governance to make sure that, okay, the law says this, but how can we make sure that we meet or exceed? Because the one thing that is written at the beginning of the act in Ontario, in Alberta, is that best practice, that due diligence, and it explicitly states that just following the letter of the law as it's written may not in many cases be sufficient. And so a lot of companies, they've seen what's happened to others that have sort of fell foul of that and only did the very bare minimum. And I think a lot of companies now are like, especially I think the attitude out west is, just towing the line isn't good enough. We need to keep pushing to be better so that if something happens, we have that chance for a due diligence defense in court. Because you don't, anytime there's a loss of any kind, that's tragic enough. On top of that, you don't want to suffer additional or an unnecessary reputational damage. You don't want to be seen as, well, not only did someone die on your work site, but you were so criminally negligent. That is such a demonstration of the corporate ethos. You don't want that kind of damage. So I think, and people are chomping at the bit to be able to get oil contracts to come in and take over production. So I think companies really, they see how fiscally important it is to make sure that when they approach safety, they take it to the nth degree. Because if they don't, a hungrier, smarter, more driven company will come in and take it to the nth degree and make it work in a way that, whereas previously people said, well, we can't do that. There's just no way. It's gonna slow production. It's gonna create undue hardship. We just can't do that. And another company comes in, well, we can do it. And we pay our guys a little bit more. We take a little bit slower time, but we're able to show that our incident rate is like nil. And so the big companies look at that and they're like, oh, okay, you know what? Even though you cost a little bit more, you're not going to stop our production. We're not going to be on the news in a negative way. So I think that there's a financial driver to it that helps the whole concept of safety be reframed into through a fiscal perspective. And I think in Ontario, quite haven't gotten to that. We don't have that lens to look through. Not everyone does anyway yet.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. And yeah, I totally agree. It's interesting because I do I operate in different jurisdictions for the most part. I don't touch Alberta as much as I used to a few years ago. But I touch into the United States, predominantly Pennsylvania, Maryland at this point in time. And it's awesome kind of seeing the difference in every single jurisdiction. But yeah, in the interest of time, I did want to ask you the question, being an auditor and auditing these different systems, predominantly COR, what advice would you give to a company they're just going through their first ever, COR audit or ISO audit or whatever it is? What advice could you give to them or to their safety team?
I would say expect to lose your safety person for a while. I think one of the most underestimated factors of taking on board a certification, whether it be ISO or COR, is the amount of time resource that it takes. You really need to be willing to take whoever's on point for that initiative and say, okay, this is all we need you to do. Because if you don't, you are going to be measuring once and cutting twice the entire time. I can't tell you how many times I have audited a company where a PM or someone from HR has been seconded as a safety person. It's not their discipline. They're still trying to do their other role. They're losing sleep, and everything that they're doing to the best of their ability, but it's only half done. And in cases where I've seen the safety person doing all of the prep and the facilitation and the changes that are necessary for meeting compliance, they're overloaded because they have their regular day job of responding to calls and incidents and reviewing stuff outside of the audit, the scope of the audit, and then they have the audit. In about 50% of my audits, either the safety person is let go or they quit after the audit's completed. It's about a 50% ratio.
Wow.
And it is because they either hit burnout or because senior management overtasked them with unrealistic expectations of what they'd be able to accomplish wearing two hats. And they think, well, it's safety and you're doing safety. Well, no, it's like saying, well, you're an engineer, but we want you to drive the car as well. Well, you can't design the car if you're driving the car, right? So you really need to look at allocating an additional resource. Now, you can do that through a surrogate or a proxy. You can hire a consultant to have them come in and guide your company through the onboarding process for all the new programs, what's an auditor going to look for. But you really need to make sure that they are co-developing that stuff with you. You can't just have them build it all in another building and then unbox it for you on the day of, because then it's not yours, you don't own it, and an auditor is going to realize that, and that's going to create issues. And it also creates headaches for when the auditor walks away and the consultant walks away, and now you're left with this big shiny new OHSMS that you don't know how it runs, right? So the first thing I would say is make sure you have the time resources and the people resources. You don't want your people to get to an audit and get through it just to say, you know what, I want to step away from this, because then you're going to lose the person who's been there from day one, right? And
Right.
It's a terrible asset to lose. The second thing I would say is to make sure that you take your time. I know that for some companies, they feel that the deadline for COR for projects is breathing down their neck. This is something that companies should have been looking at. I know that there was probably well, we'll see if it takes. We'll see if it takes. Well, it's taken, and now companies are starting to feel the crunch. Now, currently in Ontario, I mean, there's only 25 auditors that are on the list. We have hundreds of companies, close or near at 800 that are certified. So if you take the certification cycles every 3 years. So if you just divide 800 by 3 for fast numbers, and then however many hundred more in the queue to be audited, there's a backup. I mean, I get booked months in advance. Most, if not all, of the auditors have no problem with finding audits. We have people that call us all the time. I'll get 5-6 calls in a week for the same month, and I don't have anything for you. And so what I would say is take your time, first of all, and then make sure that you really have an understanding of the timelines and the time investments. Out west, 90 days you can get your COR. I mean, you just need to get paperwork prepped, and you get an auditor in and you pass it. You're looking at, well, you need to show compliance from 12 months up to the day before the audit. But how long will it take you to get your forms and your safety manual and everything to the point to where it's meeting compliance? So that might take you a year in and of itself. So you could be looking at 2 years from the time you go, hey, I want COR, to the time that you have an auditor in. So you really need to be aware of the time investment that it takes. It's not going to happen overnight. And you need to be familiar enough with the time requirements for each step to make sure that if you have a goal to get COR by such and such month of such and such year, you need to plan backwards, and you need to make sure that you're getting all of your milestones met before you proceed to the next step, or it's just going to fall apart on you.
Yeah, it's you're absolutely right. It's wild, especially making the transition from COR 2015 over to COR 2020.
Yeah.
That required almost a 360 in our program, right? The way that it was structured and everything like that. And then making the move from COR 2020 to ISO was like, wow. It was kind of like the wheel spun this way and then that way. And now it changes direction. But that's great advice, because there's a lot of people who, there are a lot of organizations, and you know what, we'll say predominantly newer organizations, because if you've been established in Ontario for long enough, then you know that you're going to need an OHSMS to work for, clients like Ellis Don or PCL or Metrolinx.
Yeah.
But it's great advice for anybody who's just coming up now, right?
Yeah.
Because it's true. And you say, oh, I need COR in 3 months. There's no chance. Like, I think when I reached out to you, I think we were 8 months, and that was still even pushing it.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
Yeah.
so it's phenomenal advice. But every interview, right, I ask the same two questions here.
Okay.
And these are the final two questions that I ask, because I kind of like to gauge the responses and get different people's opinions. But
Okay.
basically, what's your favorite thing about being a safety professional?
Okay.
And what do you hate about being a safety professional?
Oh, my favorite thing about being a safety professional is the challenge of engaging people who are totally against safety, and really challenging my salesmanship, I guess. I like to really kind of in a sneaky way, get into someone's line of sight with safety, and help create a connection, an association where they find value in it. You run across tons of guys, even the older guys, where they're retiring, and we're seeing less of those, that just they have a very narrow perspective of safety, and we know it's not always a good one. And I like getting in front of people, and I like dispelling what a conventional safety guy and what conventional safety needs to feel like. I like the challenge of being able to go in and say, well, have you thought about it this way? And I'll give you an example really quickly. So I've had a couple of clients that when I go in on an audit, and I check to make sure that they have naloxone and with the changes in legislation, and I ask the safety professional or the manager, I'll say, well, do you have a safe work practice or procedure? Yeah, we've got one. Do the guys know about it? Well, they really don't want to be trained on it, because they feel that the naloxone kits are suggestive that they're of a certain type of person on the job site, and they feel it's an insult or it creates a bad impression. And he says, I've really not been able to get buy-in from the guys. And then I went to with one client, I went to the job site and I was talking to the guys, and I was like, what do you guys think about naloxone? It said, oh, it gives us a bad name and makes us look like we're drug addicts and stuff. And I said, let me ask you this question. I said, do you if a pedestrian, because we were in a housing area and there was a lot of public access, and I said, if a member of the public came through here and fell down and got hurt, would you walk away and just say, oh, that's not my problem? He goes, no, no, no. I said, would you grab your first aid kit and use it? And he said, well, yeah, I would. And I said, would you feel bad about not being able to help a member of the public, regardless if your guys were safe and doing the right thing? If someone fell into your job site and got hurt, would you hesitate for a moment to try to provide whatever care that you felt you could render? And they obviously, yeah, we would do that, right? I said, so what happens if somebody stumbles in and they're showing signs of some type of opioid event, right? Would you want to be able to help them, or would you just say, nope, that's your problem? They said, well, no, we wouldn't. I said, well, if you're trained on naloxone and you have a naloxone kit, let's say your first aid kit, and it sits there with the kit. If you don't need it, it sits there. It just gets inspected every month or every 90 days when you do your first aid kit inspection. So if it sits there and you don't need it, great. But what if a member of the public needs your help? Can you imagine the two possible media reports? One is XYZ construction company was unable to render assistance to a poor pedestrian who overdosed on an opioid and died on the job site. Or would you rather have scenario B, where XYZ construction company, their workers were able to quickly administer naloxone until emergency service arrived, possibly saving this individual's life? And they were like, yeah, you know what? That's a pretty good point. And I enjoyed being able to reframe it into a context where they were willing to. Now they actually talked to the safety manager and they said, you know what? Why don't you get us trained on this and get us a naloxone kit out here, because we would like to be those guys, and we would like to be able to represent the company as being prepared and in a position to be able to offer assistance as much as we could for the level of training we've received and according to what resources that we have. And so I really enjoyed being able to just say, look, you don't look through this little pinhole at the problem. You can look at it from a broader perspective. And you know what? If your guys aren't the issue, that's fine. But you may want to be in a position to help others. And you know, of course, the bonus to that is if they, for some or whatever reason, had an issue with someone on their crew, now they've all been trained and it's there. And they're glad that they got it. So that's one of the things I really like about being a safety professional, is I like the challenge of being able to go in and sort of help people reframe their perspective on safety and how it can be of benefit to not just themselves, but to anyone that they may share a space with. That's the answer to that question. The thing that I don't like about safety is I don't like the enforcement attitude that is sometimes either espoused by the individual or that is expected by their leadership team. You know, safety professionals, we're there as a resource. We're supposed to be a guide, a mentor at best, but you know, someone who is either a subject matter expert or at least a jack of all trades when it comes to helping, from the guy on the ground to leadership, navigate through a very complex field of legislation, professional standards, regulation, manufacturer requirements. And we're not really I don't think that our design intent should not be around enforcement. I mean, we have every company has a rank structure. You have supervisors, you have managers, and they're there to enforce company rules and safety rules. Now, that's not to say that a safety person can't assist or provide guidance on the enforcement of that, but I don't think that they are the best tool in the belt to go out. They shouldn't be going out and knocking people over the head with their safety manual, right? I find that safety professionals are their own worst enemies in that regard. I believe when they say, oh, I can't get buy-in from the guys, they don't like it when I come to the field, they won't talk to me. Well, take a look at what you're doing when you go out there. Are you there as an asset, or are you there as a hammer, you know? And that still makes me cringe. There was a lot of that in Alberta when I first got into it, and I saw how little traction that got with the guys. And so when I go to, obviously, as an auditor, we can't really consult, but I can pull someone to the side and say, have you ever tried this method? Have you ever tried this method? Because as an auditor, one of the first things I look for when I go with the management team, who are usually office-based, especially the health and safety manager, they say, let's go do a field visit. I'm like, great. Well, I watched the reactions of the field workers to this individual being on site, and I can pretty much gauge whether there's rapport, respect, or if there's a lot of disdain and resentment. And if I sense that there isn't any type of connection or engagement, I'll softly question their approaches and what type of successes they have, and try to recommend a more supportive approach if they're finding that they're not getting the engagement that they wish that they had. So that would be the thing I don't like about safety.
And it's funny that that you mention it, because some people think I'm crazy when I tell them this, but within all of our organizations, right? So RSG International is an overarching organization, and we have divisions underneath us. There is not a single safety team that has the authority to discipline a worker. And I set it up that way on purpose. You know, at the ministry, that's all I did. I went in there, I couldn't tell you how to fix it. I would tell you something's wrong. Here's your summons to appear in court. Have a good day. And you know, coming from construction, I hated that approach when I was a construction worker. I used that approach when I was an inspector, because that's the only the approach I could use.
Yeah.
But I totally agree with you. We have the authority to shut the job down. I have the
We do.
authority to stop that worker,
Yeah.
right? And the team has the authority to stop that worker. But in terms of writing them up, you know, formally writing them up and things like that, we have none of that authority. And some people look at me and they say, well, what do you mean? Like, well, shouldn't you be doing that? I said, no. I said, because I'm here to work with the people.
Yeah.
I'm here to work with the workers. So I love that you said that, because that's one of my pet peeves in this industry as well. It's just the heavy hammer approach.
Yeah.
It's never going to work. But honestly, Scott, this is the end of our little chat here, and it was awesome having you on. I really
thank
appreciate
you so much, John.
But yeah, so I'm going to put links in the show notes to your LinkedIn profile, as well as your company's website.
Okay, great.
So yeah, if you're looking for an auditor, go check out Scott. I promise you, he didn't pay me to say this. He is the best experience I've had with auditors was with Scott. So excellent. Scott, thank you again for your time, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you so much, John.